Before COVID hit, a young lady I know had almost everything going for her. She had a near perfect friend group, like minded academic and athletic peers. She was driven to accomplish and succeed, and her relationship with her father was excellent. It sort of had to be, as the one thing working against her was that her mother was in prison for something almost unspeakable. Then the first friend moved away, a necessity for her parents' employment. They tried to stay in touch, but 500 miles apart makes that difficult when you're 10. A year later, another friend left, and then another. It wasn't long before the entire group had disbanded, leaving this kid all alone on that front. Being driven as she was taught, she pushed onward, finding purpose in robotics and community engagement through programs at school. So much so, she designed the entire competitive project for her school's local K-12 national community engagement presentation as a fifth grader. Furthermore, she was ascending quickly in robotics, a high-ranking competitive global program in her district, fixing coding errors, discovering new ways to engineer parts. For the competitive side of things, she thought outside the box. And then, COVID. Everything shut down. Everything was canceled. Everything she'd worked so hard to accomplish, gone in a moment. She gave up. She never said, "Why try?" But I watched that change in her happen over time as she isolated and quit on her own life. But this was only the beginning. Eventually, schools opened back up, and students were allowed to congregate again. But this kid had a problem. She no longer belonged anywhere. To make matters worse, she had hit puberty, and she was anxious. So naturally, a boy struck her fancy, and she pursued him. They became friends, and feelings blossomed, but it was one-sided. She liked him, but he liked boys. The trans movement was gaining heavy traction at the time, something she'd seen a great deal of on the internet, so she had an idea. Why not just say I'm a boy? And that's exactly what she did. It was enough for the boy to agree to date her, and things were fine for a while at school. There was some friction at home with a full persona change, but overall it went pretty smoothly for a while. Then a strange thing began. She lost herself somewhere in the mix. She no longer cared about coding, robotics, community involvement, or even helping people, which seemed to be the root of all things prior. She became obsessed with being this persona she'd created. Turns out, a middle school boy isn't the most skilled at relationships, causing further strain, eventually ending the relationship. But now she was stuck. COVID allowed a reset of sorts, a new beginning for kids of a certain age. She'd taken that option, but now she was someone that was not true to herself. She was lost. She began hiding in her room, but her parents didn't think much of it, given she was a teenager now. She neglected her schoolwork as well, causing further friction with her father. She became angry and depressed. According to her, she simply didn't feel anything anymore. Nothing mattered. So she found a new group of kids to hang out with, a group that liked to harm themselves and see if they could avoid detection. She was very good at it. In fact, it wasn't even that hard. She just wore hoodies to hide the marks that eventually became scars. And since no one noticed the scars, she figured nobody cared. Her depression deepened. She decided there was no point to life and began making arrangements to end hers after a final summer. She was kind during those months, involved with family, telling jokes and eating dinner at the table with everyone. Her father had remarried a woman with 3 other children, and those children had become her true siblings. She loved them. But it was short-lived, and the new school year snuck up on her. The next morning was the first day of school. She panicked. It wasn't supposed to get this far. She tried to sleep, figuring she'd just do it one night soon on her weekend, but sleep wouldn't come. With scissors, she chopped her hair off, then scraped her scalp, leaving wounds and little frays of hair. She broke the razor out of the device she used to shave her legs and gouged it into her arm as deep as she could get it. And then she realized she didn't want to die. The next morning, riding in the passenger seat of her father's car on the way to school, she pulled back her hood, tears streaming down her face, and grabbed her father's hand. My hand. I'll never forget the look on her face, the fear, the regret, the cry for help. I didn't panic. I took a breath, deciding right there that I would do whatever it took to help her, to keep her alive. I called into work and drove her to the hospital. Unsure of what to expect, I also contacted her mother, who was now out of prison and trying to be involved in our child's life. She didn't answer, but I left a message. I'd never been on this side of the equation before, but I was there for my daughter, holding her hand any chance I could, offering comfort, not judging, not preaching, only being present, the thing I hadn't been enough of. That day I learned everything. I rarely cry, something men of my generation were taught not to do. But when they put her in the ambulance to transport her to a psychiatric facility, something inside me broke. Instinct pushed back the tears that formed as those doors closed with her inside. The only thing keeping me sane was that I knew the driver, a good man I trusted with her. He said, "We'll take care of her." And that helped. It reminded me that once I'd helped his daughter in a similar situation. This was just two fathers doing what we could to protect our daughters. Once the ambulance pulled away, I found my way back to my car. I started to just go about my day, but all the repressed emotion and fear flooded into me. I let go, crying, weeping, screaming. A woman passing by likely thought I was insane, but I didn't care. I was going to be whatever I had to be to get my daughter healthy again. And then my phone rang. Her mother. I explained what had happened, at least what I knew at the time, which wasn't much. We hadn't got that far yet. She, as usual, was apathetic, offering kind words with little to no sentiment behind it. Now, I'm not bashing her. I'm quite proud of her since her release from prison. She's done a good bit to improve herself and fit into the world. I had some part in that as well, using this same principle of quiet presence. But that, perhaps, is a different book. 22 days. That's how long my daughter was in the loony bin. More phone calls from more people than I ever cared to talk to, telling me about things I didn't yet understand. But I had opened my mind. I took it all in. I caught keywords and terms so I could research. I came across the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychology. I read it all 992 pages. Some things fit. In fact, many things fit. But it didn't seem to be the root, the why. Regardless of the cause, however, I realized the only thing that I could do to help was ensure they didn't over-medicate her and that I was present, especially through the hard times. I quit coaching, which was a huge tax on my time and why I was so absent. I also quit many other extras, just so I could be there. The first years were very hard, taking 3 more trips to psych wards before the self-harm fully ended. And then a strange thing happened. She became a normal teenager. Not perfect with straight A's and no behavioral issues. We had some legal things to attend to throughout, but it was normal, at least. At least from what I've seen in my decade of teaching. Kids that are lost, they try to find themselves. Sometimes that's through the wrong people. That is all in the past now. 5 years later, after countless nights just sitting in the quiet, being a shoulder to both cry on and hear what her brain is overthinking, here we are. She'll graduate early this year. She's done a great deal of community service, and she just passed her driver's permit test. She's been afraid to drive since she was 12. This is a big achievement. Furthermore, she's abandoned her ideal of living in a van down by the river, quite literally, and is now exploring both college and workforce options. She is becoming independent. This was not an easy road. We fought. I even had to kick her out once for bringing drugs into our house because we had little children as well. If the hardest thing I've ever done was leave her in that ambulance, the second hardest was kicking her out. There was a reason. It wasn't for impulse or emotion. It was persistence. I made it very clear, even in kicking her out, that I was here for her, but she had to be safe, not just for her, but for everyone around her. She moved in with her mother. I did give her the silent treatment for a couple weeks, just so she'd realize that I won't be here forever. At some point I will die, and I can't mitigate her consequences for her. She had to learn that. Unfortunately, she's basically me as a teenager, so she has to learn everything the hard way. There's a lesson in all this. Be consistent. Don't give up. It is always darkest before the dawn. The point is, you don't have to be loud or in control. You just have to be there.